The dealer didn't just laugh. He made sure other customers heard it. Made it a show. Made me the entertainment. Standing there in his showroom, surrounded by gleaming new John Deere equipment, while I asked about 5 old Farmall tractors he had sitting behind the service building. Greg Turner, owner of Turner's John Deere, said loud enough for the 6 other customers browsing equipment to hear, "Marcus, you want to buy 5 Farmalls from the 1940s and 1950s instead of one modern tractor? You understand those things are 50 to 70 years old. You understand they're scrap metal with sentiment. You understand you'll spend more time fixing them than farming with them." I said, "What are you asking for all 5? Greg laughed again, looked at the other customers. Made sure they were paying attention. This was going to be good. The young farmer wanting junk instead of modern equipment. The entertainment they needed on a slow Tuesday afternoon. He said, "Marcus, I took those in on trades over the past 3 years. Farmers, upgrading, getting rid of old junk. I've been meaning to scrap them. They're worth maybe $500 each in scrap value. Total scrap value may be $2,500. If you actually want to farm with 70-year-old equipment instead of buying something that works, I'll sell you all 5 for $12,000. That's generous. That's me being nice because you're young and don't know better yet. But seriously, buy something modern. Finance A6M. Get into this century. Stop embarrassing yourself." The other customers were watching. One of them said, "Son, take his advice. You can't farm competitively with equipment from before your parents were born. You'll fail. You'll waste years discovering what everyone already knows." I said, "I'll take all 5 for $12,000. Can you have them running by Friday? I need them for spring planting." The laughter was universal. Greg, the 6 customers, the parts guy behind the counter. Everyone thought this was hilarious. The young farmer buying junk, paying $12,000 for scrap, planning to farm with equipment older than his grandparents. This was the story they'd tell. The cautionary tale. The example of what not to do. Greg said, "Marcus, I can have them running by Friday. I can take your money. I can sell you equipment I know will fail you. But I'm telling you, as someone who's sold tractors for 30 years, you're making a catastrophic mistake. You're setting yourself up for failure. You're wasting money on garbage that should be scrapped. Please, reconsider. Buy something modern. Finance it if you have to. But don't do this." I said, "I'll pay cash. $12,000 for all 5. Running by Friday. That's the deal." Greg shrugged, took my money. $12,000 in cash. Had his mechanics get the 5 Farmalls running. A 1944 Farmall, HA, 1949 Farmall, MA 1951 Farmall, Super MA 1953, Farmall Super Harry, a 1956 Farmall 400. All old, all basic, all paid off, completely. All mine. My name is Marcus Chun. I'm 39 years old now. This happened in 2011, 13 years ago. I was 26, just bought my first farm. 200 acres for $160,000. Small operation. Modest. Starting out. The kind of farm that needed equipment. The kind of farmer everyone had advice for. The kind of situation where dealers assumed they knew better. Greg Turner assumed I was making a mistake. The 6 customers agreed. The parts guy thought I was crazy. Everyone who heard the story, and the story spread fast in small farming communities, thought I'd wasted $12,000 on junk. Thought I'd failed before I started. Thought I'd be back begging to finance modern equipment within a year. They were all wrong, but wrong in ways they wouldn't understand for years. Wrong in ways that would only become clear when the agricultural economy collapsed. Wrong in ways that would prove out through time rather than immediately. I farmed those 200 acres with 5 old Farmalls for 13 years, from 2011 to 2024, through good years and bad years, through high commodity prices and low, through the boom times and the bust times, through the years when everyone was expanding and the years when everyone was failing. Through it all, 5 old Farmalls paid off completely, maintained meticulously, working reliably. The economics were simple. $12,000 total investment in equipment. Split across 5 tractors, $2,400 per tractor. Maintenance costs over 13 years, approximately 18,000 total parts, oil, repairs, normal wear. Fuel efficiency wasn't great, but wasn't terrible. Total 30-year equipment cost, $30,000. Equipment that worked, that started, that planted and harvested and did everything required. Compare that to what Greg wanted me to buy. A John Deere 6M series. Base price in 2011, $90,000. Financed over 7 years. Monthly payment, roughly $1,400. 7 years of payments, $118,000 including interest, plus maintenance, plus insurance, plus the fact that after 7 years it was worth maybe $40,000. Total 7-year cost, over $120,000 for equipment that did the same work my 5 Farmalls did. But nobody cared about that math in 2011. Everyone cared about looking modern, looking successful, looking like a real farmer. Nobody cared about total cost of ownership. Nobody cared about what happened if commodity prices fell. Nobody cared about equipment payments during bad years. Everyone cared about appearing professional, about having the latest equipment, about fitting in. I didn't fit in. I was the young farmer with the old Farmalls, the guy who'd wasted $12,000 on junk, the example of what not to do. The cautionary tale dealers told their customers. Greg told the story often. There's this young farmer, bought 5 Farmalls from the 40s and 50s instead of 1 modern tractor. He'll be back. They always come back. Reality catches up. Old equipment fails. They realize they need modern. They finance something proper. Give him a year, maybe 2. Then he'll understand. Year 1 passed. I didn't come back. Farmed successfully. Made profit. Paid all my costs. Had no equipment payments. Saved money instead of making payments. That year 2 would be different. Year 2 passed. I didn't come back. Expanded to 300 acres. Bought adjacent land for $90,000 cash. Land I could afford because I had no equipment payments. Land that increased my operation without increasing my overhead. Land that proved the strategy was working. Greg assumed it was timing, that I'd bought at a good moment, that it wouldn't last. Year 3, 4, 5 passed. I kept farming, kept maintaining the Farmalls, kept having no equipment payments, kept saving money, kept expanding slowly. By 2016, I had 400 acres. By 2018, I had 500. All bought cash. All made possible by having no equipment debt. All proving the strategy that everyone had mocked. Then 2019 hit. The agricultural economy turned. Commodity prices fell. Corn dropped from $4 a bushel to $3.20. Soybeans crashed. Wheat tanked. The boom years ended. The reality years began. The years that separated farmers with equity from farmers with debt. The years that proved whether your equipment strategy was sustainable or suicidal. Farmers with new equipment felt it first. Monthly payments didn't stop because commodity prices fell. Banks didn't care that your revenue dropped. Equipment dealers didn't offer discounts because times were hard. The $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 monthly payments kept coming every month. Regardless of whether farming was profitable, regardless of whether you could afford it, payments were what they were. Deal with it or fail. I had no payments. The Farmalls kept working, kept costing approximately $1,500 a year in maintenance, kept doing their job regardless of commodity prices, kept letting me farm profitably even when revenue was down because my costs were down, kept proving that paid-off equipment beats financed equipment when markets turn. I was watching neighbors, farmers who had bought modern equipment, who'd financed properly, who'd done what dealers recommended, struggled to make payments, struggled to keep operating, struggled to survive the downturn. Some sold equipment at massive losses, some defaulted, some foreclosed, some gave up farming entirely, all because equipment payments became unsustainable when revenue fell. I kept farming, kept profiting modestly, kept having no payments, kept saving instead of servicing debt, kept proving that the laughed-at strategy was actually the smart strategy, that old paid-off equipment was actually better than new financed equipment, that Greg Turner and everyone who'd mocked me had been catastrophically wrong about what mattered. By 2021, Greg's dealership was struggling. Equipment sales down. Farmers couldn't afford new. Couldn't get financing approved. Couldn't justify upgrades when barely surviving. His inventory sat. His salespeople sat. His business model built on constant equipment turnover and aggressive financing was failing in an economy where farmers couldn't afford either. That's when he called me. First time we'd spoken since I'd bought the 5 Farmalls in 2011. 10 years of silence. 10 years of him assuming I'd failed. 10 years of him waiting for me to come back, needing modern equipment. Instead, he was calling me, asking for help. Asking to understand how I was surviving when farmers with modern equipment were failing. We met at a diner. Neutral ground. Greg looked older than his 62 years. Tired, stressed, the confidence and swagger he'd had in 2011 were gone. Replaced with something like desperation. Like a man watching everything he'd built collapse and trying to understand why. He said, "Marcus, I've been watching. You're still farming, still profitable, still expanding, still buying land while everyone else is barely surviving. You're doing it with the same 5 Farmalls you bought in 2011. Equipment, I told you, was junk. Equipment everyone laughed at. Equipment that should have failed. How are you making it work when farmers with modern equipment are failing?" I said, "Because I have no equipment payments. My total equipment cost is maybe $2,000 a year in maintenance. Your farmers are paying $12,000 to $20,000 a year in equipment payments plus maintenance. When commodity prices are high, that difference doesn't matter much. When prices fall, that difference is survival versus failure. I can farm profitably at $3.20 corn because my costs are low. They can't farm profitably at $3.50 because their costs are high. It's not complicated. It's just math, Greg said. But the Farmalls, they're 70 years old. How are they still working? How haven't they failed catastrophically? How aren't you spending more on maintenance than new equipment would cost? I said, because I maintained them properly. Because old, simple mechanical equipment is actually more reliable than modern complex equipment when you take care of it. Because a 1949 Farmall M is a tractor, a PTO, and a hydraulic system. That's it. No computers, no sensors, no electronics to fail. No software updates. No DEF systems. Just mechanical simplicity that I can fix myself with basic tools. Versus your modern tractors that require dealer diagnostics, proprietary software, and parts that cost 10 times what mine cost. Simple beats, complex for reliability. Old beats new for repairability. Paid off beats financed for sustainability. He absorbed that. Looked like a man confronting fundamental errors in worldview. Like someone realizing that 30 years of selling based on certain assumptions might have been 30 years of selling farmers into expensive mistakes. He said, I mocked you in front of customers. Made you the example of what not to do. Told that story dozens of times. Used you as the cautionary tale. The young farmer who didn't know better, who wasted money on junk, who'd fail and learn and come back ready to buy properly. You became my go-to story, and I was completely wrong. You were right about everything, and I've spent 10 years telling people the opposite. I said you were selling, doing your job, maximizing dealer profit. That requires convincing farmers they need new equipment, need to upgrade, need to finance. That's the business model. You weren't wrong morally. You were wrong mathematically. The model works when commodity prices are high, fails when prices fall. We're in the failing part now. You're seeing the results. How he should sell differently, how he could help farmers succeed instead of just selling them equipment. I told him the truth, that the dealer business model is fundamentally built on equipment turnover, on farmers' financing, on constant upgrades. Changing that model would reduce profit, might make the dealership unviable, might cost him his business. The system he was part of required farmers to constantly buy, required financing, required the very things that made farmers fragile. He couldn't change that without destroying the business that had supported him for 30 years. He left that meeting looking worse than when he'd arrived, like a man confronting truths he couldn't act on without massive personal cost. Like someone who'd discovered he'd been part of a system that harmed the people he thought he was helping, but couldn't escape that system without losing everything. It was sad. Watching a man realize he'd been wrong but trapped by his own success into continuing to be wrong. Greg sold the dealership in 2022, age 63, earlier than he'd planned, to a larger corporate dealer group. He told me later he couldn't keep doing it. Couldn't keep selling farmers' equipment they'd struggled to pay for. Couldn't keep profiting from their stress. Couldn't keep participating in a system he'd come to see as predatory. The sale let him retire, let him exit. I'm still farming, still using those 5 Farmalls, 13 years now. The 1944 H is 80 years old, still starts, still works, still plants and harvests and does what tractors do. The others are similar, old, reliable, paid off, working, costing me approximately $2,000 a year total to maintain, letting me farm profitably regardless of commodity prices, letting me survive and thrive while farmers with modern equipment struggle and fail. I now own 700 acres, all bought cash with money I saved by having no equipment payments, all productive land acquired slowly through patient capital accumulation, all proving that the strategy Greg laughed at in 2011 was actually the only sustainable strategy. That old paid-off equipment plus patient expansion beats new financed equipment plus aggressive growth. That appearing successful matters less than being successful. That dealer advice optimizes for dealer profit, not farmer survival. The 5 Farmalls sit in my equipment shed, maintained meticulously. 1944H, 1949M, 1951, Super M, 1953, Super Harry, 1956, 400 old, simple, reliable, paid off. The tractors everyone laughed at, the equipment everyone said would fail. The junk that should have been scrapped. Still working, still profitable, still proving everyone wrong 13 years later. I calculate sometimes what I would have spent if I'd bought what Greg recommended in 2011. The John Deere 6M, $90,000 financed, 7 years of payments, then needing to upgrade or continue with equipment worth $40,000. Most farmers upgrade, finance another tractor, another 7 years of payments. By 2024, they'd have made 13 years of equipment payments, somewhere around $250,000 total, plus maintenance, plus insurance, plus depreciation. Total cost may be $300,000 for equipment that did the same work my $30,000 Farmalls did. That $270,000 difference is land, is expansion, is equity, is security, is the difference between surviving the downturn and failing during it, is the reason I own 700 acres while farmers who followed conventional wisdom are struggling to hold 400, is the proof that the laughed-at strategy was correct and the recommended strategy was catastrophically expensive. I see Greg occasionally, at the Cope, at the grain elevator, at community events, at places where farmers and former dealers both exist in the same small-town agricultural ecosystem. He's retired now, aged 85, looks more relaxed than he did running the dealership, less burdened by the daily requirement to sell, less stressed by inventory that won't move. Free from the guilt of selling equipment to farmers who couldn't afford the total cost of ownership. Free from participating in a system he'd come to question fundamentally. Free from the internal conflict of knowing he was wrong, but being economically dependent on continuing to be wrong. Free from having to choose between profit and honesty every single day. We talk sometimes about farming, about equipment, about the agricultural economy, about what's changed and what hasn't, about the dealers still selling the same way he used to, still convincing farmers they need new equipment, need to upgrade constantly, need to finance everything, still creating the stress and debt and financial fragility that destroy farmers when markets turn, still profiting from the same business model that Greg eventually couldn't stomach participating in anymore. The conversations are honest now in ways they couldn't be when he was selling. When he had a vested interest in defending the dealer model, when admitting I was right would have meant admitting his entire career was built on backwards assumptions. Now he can be honest, can admit he sold farmers into situations that benefited dealers more than farmers, can acknowledge that the financing-driven business model creates fragility, can see clearly what he couldn't see when his livelihood depended on not seeing it. He apologized once, specifically, directly, for laughing at me in 2011, for mocking me in front of other customers, for using me as the cautionary tale for 10 years, for spending a decade telling farmers I was the example of what not to do, for spreading a story that made me look foolish when actually I was being strategic, for contributing to a culture that valued appearance over substance and financing over ownership. I told him no apology needed, that he was selling, doing his job, operating within a system that required what he did, that he wasn't evil or malicious or intentionally harmful, that he was just part of a machine bigger than individual dealers, a machine that profits from farmer debt and equipment turnover, a machine built on manufacturers needing to sell and dealers needing to move inventory and banks needing to finance and farmers being convinced they need the latest equipment. Changing that machine would require changing the entire agricultural equipment industry. Individual dealers can't do that. They just do their job within the system or exit the system entirely. Greg eventually exited. That took more courage than most dealers have. Most stay, most keep selling, most never question. Most retire comfortable with their profits and unbothered by what those profits cost farmers. The 5 Farmalls keep working. 13 years now, soon to be 14. The 1944 H will be 81 years old next year. Still starts every morning. Still pulls equipment. Still plants and harvests and does what tractors have always done. The 1949 M is 75. The 1951 Super M is 73. The 1953 Super H is 71. The 1956 400 is 68. All older than most farmers. All still working. All still reliable. All still costing me approximately $2,000 a year total to maintain. 5 tractors. $1,500 a year average maintenance per tractor. Less than most farmers pay per month for a single modern tractor payment. Let me put those numbers in perspective through comparison to my neighbors. Real farmers, real situations, real outcomes that demonstrate what I'm describing isn't theory. It's documented reality happening in my community right now. James Whitfield Farms, adjacent to me, same age as me. Started farming the same year I did. Bought similar acreage, had similar resources, made different equipment decisions. Bought a John Deere 7R in 2011, $95,000, financed over 7 years. Making $2,300 monthly payments, has been making equipment payments for 13 straight years. Will make them for at least 7 more years. Total paid so far, approximately $180,000. Total he'll pay by 2025 when the 8R is paid off, approximately $370,000. For 2 tractors across 14 years, I've paid $30,000 total for 5 tractors across 13 years. James has paid or will pay $370,000 for 2 tractors across 14 years. Same time period, same area, same farming. $340,000 difference. That difference is the reason I own 700 acres and James still owns the original 420 he started with. That difference is equity versus payments, ownership versus debt, freedom versus financial stress. When prices fall, he's barely covering costs. The equipment payments don't adjust for market conditions. They're there. every month. Regardless of whether farming is good or bad, regardless of whether he can afford them. The bank doesn't care about corn prices, doesn't care about his stress, wants payment. He provides payment or loses everything. I farm stress-free. Relatively, my profits fluctuate with commodity prices like everyone's, but my equipment costs don't fluctuate. They stay low, stay manageable, stay affordable, even in bad years. The Farmalls don't require payments regardless of market conditions. They just require maintenance. Maintenance I can afford. Maintenance I can do myself. Maintenance that doesn't stress me. Maintenance that doesn't threaten my operation. My bad years are profitable. James's bad years are survival. That's the difference between owning equipment and owing for equipment. Sarah Martinez Farms, 3 miles from me. Also started in 2011. Also bought land that year. Made different equipment choices than both James and me. Bought used John Deere equipment. A200564-204, 45,000. Paid cash. No financing. Smart decision. Middle ground between my extreme old and James's extreme new. Her equipment works, doesn't require payments. Costs more to maintain than mine because it's more complex. Less than new, but more than old. She's done well. Owns 560 acres now. Less than me. More than James. Her strategy worked. Proved that paid off beats financed, even if paid off is newer than my 1940s equipment. Sarah and I talk about equipment sometimes, about our different approaches, about why we both succeeded when farmers who financed struggled, about the common thread: ownership, freedom from payments, flexibility during bad years, cash available for land instead of being consumed by equipment debt, security that comes from controlling your costs, from knowing exactly what your equipment will cost you, from not being dependent on banks and payments and financing terms. She asked me once why I went so old, why I chose 1940s equipment instead of 2000s equipment like she bought. I told her about the simplicity, about being able to fix everything myself, about parts being cheap, about mechanical systems I understand completely, about not needing dealer diagnostics, about equipment I own completely instead of equipment that requires corporate software to repair, about freedom that comes from total independence, about preferring maximum control over moderate convenience. She understood, saw the logic, but preferred her approach. Preferred equipment slightly more complex but more comfortable. Preferred cabs and air conditioning and modern conveniences. Paying more for maintenance to get more comfort. Fair choice. Different priority. Her strategy works for her. Mine works for me. Both work better than James's financing approach. Both prove that ownership beats debt. Both demonstrate that paying cash for used beats financing new. Both validate that the dealer recommendations optimize for dealer profit, not farmers' success. The agricultural equipment financing system is built on a lie: that you can't farm successfully without the latest technology. That old equipment will fail and cost more to maintain than new costs to finance. That financing is normal and smart and how farming works. All lies, or at minimum, half-truths that serve sellers more than buyers. Truth is this: modern equipment offers convenience and comfort, offers technological advantages, offers features that make farming easier. but doesn't offer profitability advantages that justify the cost. Unless you're farming thousands of acres, where small efficiency gains multiply across huge acreage. For operations like mine, 700 acres, which is above average, but not huge, the efficiency gains from modern equipment don't justify the cost. Don't come close. The marginal improvements don't pay for themselves. The financing creates fragility that outweighs the convenience benefits. My 5 Farmalls do everything I need. Plant, harvest, pull equipment, provide PTO power, do what tractors do. They do it without computers, without complex emission systems, without DEF fluid, without proprietary software, without dealer dependence, without monthly payments. They do it simply, reliably, affordably, independently. That's worth more to me than air conditioning and GPS and automated systems I don't need. I'm not anti-technology, not a Luddite, not opposed to progress. I'm pro-ownership, pro-independence, pro-financial freedom, pro-making equipment decisions based on total cost of ownership over the equipment's useful life rather than based on monthly payment amounts that hide total cost. I chose OL because OL was paid off and simple and independent. If I could buy modern equipment that offered those same characteristics, I might choose modern. But I can't. Modern equipment comes with financing and complexity and dependence. Comes with costs that don't make economic sense for my operation. Comes with trade-offs I'm not willing to make. The dealer who laughed in 2011 didn't understand this. Didn't see that I was making strategic choices based on different priorities than he assumed. Assumed I was choosing old because I couldn't afford new. Assumed I was making necessity-driven decisions rather than strategic decisions. Assumed I was poor or ignorant or both. Was wrong on all counts. I was choosing old because old better served my goals. Better provided the ownership and independence and financial freedom I was building toward. Better aligned with my strategy, even though it looked worse to people judging by conventional standards. I maintained them myself. Do all my own work. Rebuild carburetors. Replace bearings. Fix hydraulics. It's not hard. The equipment is simple. The parts are available. The work is straightforward. No dealer diagnostics required. No proprietary software. No computers to fail. Just mechanical systems that make sense, that can be understood, that can be fixed with basic tools and basic knowledge. That's the advantage of old. That's what modern equipment sacrificed for complexity. That's what farmers pay for when they buy new. Complexity they can't fix. Dependence on dealers. Systems they don't control. My 5 Farmalls I control completely. Understand completely. Fix completely. Own completely. No bank owns them. No dealer controls them. No manufacturer restricts them. They're mine. Fully. Forever. As long as I maintain them. That's freedom. That's ownership. That's what farmers used to have before equipment became computers on wheels that required dealer authorization to repair. Young farmers ask me sometimes how I did it. How I built 700 acres. How I survived the downturn. How I'm profitable when they're struggling. I tell them about the 5 Farmalls. About choosing old paid off over new financed. About prioritizing ownership over appearance. About understanding that equipment payments are the enemy. That debt makes you fragile. That looking successful matters less than being successful. That dealer advice serves dealers. that patience and frugality and discipline compound into equity, while financing and upgrading and following conventional wisdom compound into stress. Most don't listen. Most think I'm the exception. Most think they need modern equipment. Most finance what dealers recommend. Most build the way everyone builds. Most struggle the way everyone struggles. Most learn the hard way what I learned by choosing differently. Most eventually understand that the laughed-at farmer was actually the smart farmer, that the mocked strategy was actually the sustainable strategy, that old paid-off beats new financed every time when measured over decades instead of years. A few listen. A few change their approach. A few buy used instead of new. A few prioritize ownership over appearance. A few build differently. A few survive because they learned from someone else's success instead of their own failure. Those few make the mockery worth it. Make the story worth telling. Make the lesson worth sharing. The dealer laughed when I bought 5 old Farmalls. Everyone laughed. Everyone assumed I'd fail. Everyone was wrong. Years later, I still have my farm. 700 acres, debt-free, profitable, sustainable, built on equipment everyone said was junk, built on strategy everyone said was foolish, built on discipline everyone said was unnecessary, built on patience everyone said was too slow, built on 5 old Farmalls that keep working, keep proving them wrong, keep demonstrating that old isn't obsolete, that paid off beats financed, that simple beats complex, that ownership beats appearance, that the laughed-at farmer was actually the smart farmer all along. Greg Turner laughed in 2011. Sold his dealership in 2022. Lives with knowing he spent 30 years selling farmers into debt and stress. Lives with understanding he was part of a system that harmed the people he thought he was helping. Lives with the knowledge that the young farmer he mocked had figured out what he'd missed in 3 decades of selling. Lives retired but not at peace. Lives with regret disguised as retirement. Lives knowing the farmer he laughed at was right and he was wrong, and 30 years of his career was built on backwards assumptions. I live farming, 700 acres, 5 old Farmalls, debt-free, profitable, free in ways farmers with modern equipment aren't. Free from payments, free from banks, free from dealers, free from the stress of financing, free from the fragility of debt, free from the system that destroyed so many of my neighbors. Free because I chose differently. Free because I ignored the laughter. Free because I understood what mattered. Free because 5 old Farmalls taught me what modern equipment never could. That dealers lie. Not intentionally, just structurally. Their business model requires selling, requires financing, requires constant turnover, requires farmers to believe new is necessary, requires farmers to take debt, requires farmers to be fragile. Their profit comes from farmer stress, from farmer financing, from farmer debt. Individual dealers might be good people, but the system requires them to sell farmers into situations that benefit dealers more than farmers. That's the truth. That's what the 5 Farmalls taught me. That's what 13 years proved. That's what 700 debt-free acres demonstrate. That's what the laughter in 2011 couldn't prevent me from learning. The dealer laughed. Years later I still have my farm. He sold his dealership. I'm still farming. He's retired with regret. I'm working with satisfaction. He lives knowing he was wrong. I live knowing I was right. The laughter in 2011 became the lesson by 2024. The mocked farmer became the successful farmer. The junk equipment became the smart equipment. The cautionary tale became the success story. The example of what not to do became the example of what to do. All because I bought 5 old Farmalls. All because I ignored the laughter. All because I understood that ownership beats debt and patience beats speed, and old paid off beats new, financed every single time when the game is survival instead of appearance. That's farming. That's equipment. That's economics. That's truth. That's what 13 years with 5 old Farmalls taught me. That's what 700 debt-free acres prove. That's what the dealer who laughed eventually learned. That's the story. That's the lesson. That's the vindication. That's success measured correctly instead of conventionally. The dealer laughed. I bought 5 old Farmalls. Years later, I still have my farm. He doesn't have his dealership. I was right. He was wrong. The equipment everyone mocked saved me. The equipment everyone recommended destroyed others. That's truth. That's proof. That's vindication. That's farming done right.